S'il vous plaît, si on peut voir la vidéo.
Almost a year into the US-Israeli genocide against 2.3 million Palestinians in the occupied and besieged Gaza Strip, last week the UN General Assembly made history. For the first time ever, it overwhelmingly called out Israel's apartheid regime, and for the first time in 42 years, it called for sanctions to end Israel's illegal occupation as determined by the International Court of Justice in July. Armed, funded, and shielded from accountability by the colonial West, Israel is displaying an unprecedented level of perceived invincibility, or what the UN Secretary General calls total impunity. It has not only exterminated tens of thousands of Palestinians in Gaza, and in a few days massacred hundreds and injured thousands in Lebanon, it is simultaneously bulldozing the very tenets of international law. In a statement issued on the same day as the UN General Assembly resolution, dozens of UN human rights experts said that states must, quote, take meaningful steps to comply with their international obligations reaffirmed in the ICJ ruling, end of quote, by imposing economic, trade, academic, and other sanctions on Israel's illegal occupation and apartheid regime, prioritizing a comprehensive military embargo as the most urgent. All the above resolutions and statements reflect a rising global majority that not only stands with the struggle for Palestinian liberation, but also with the fundamental mission of saving humanity, no less, from a might-makes-right era that is relegating UN institutions to the dustbin of history. Palestinians have no illusions whatsoever, though, that justice will shine on us from the ICJ or the UN, the latter being historically responsible for the 1947 to 1949 Nakba, the ethnic cleansing of the majority of indigenous Palestinians and the establishment of Israel as a settler colony over most of the area of historic Palestine. We have international law on our side. We have the ethical high ground as an indigenous people resisting a depraved, genocidal system of oppression to achieve our rights. Ethics and the law are necessary in our or any other liberation struggle, but they are never sufficient. To dismantle a system of oppression, the oppressed invariably need power as well. People power, grassroots power, intersectional coalition power, solidarity power, media power, cultural power, among others. The deep complicity of the colonial West and the genealogy of Israeli war ministers Yoav Gallant's depiction and treatment of Palestinians in Gaza as human animals can be traced to the centuries-old history of European and Euro-American dehumanization and colonial subjugation, even extermination, of non-European nations. One lesson we have learned from that history is that physical erasure necessitates epistemic and cultural erasure. The latter always makes the former more tolerable and less contestable, as oppressors cannot be blamed for eliminating something that did not really exist or whose existence did not constitute sufficient subjectivity. Addressing cultural erasure, the US-based Middle East Studies Association said in a recent statement, quote, Israel is engaging in cultural genocide against the Palestinian people with the active support of its American and European allies, end of quote. In fact, Israel's ongoing genocide, according to UN human rights experts, has also included, quote, domicide, herbicide, scholasticide, medicide, cultural genocide, and more recently, ecocide, end of quote. The entanglement of epistemic and cultural erasure with the physical elimination of the natives dates back arguably to the Vatican's doctrine of discovery, which was rescinded only last year after providing justification for European colonialism and genocide for 5 centuries. This quintessential European doctrine which constructed the rest of the world as a jungle, a terra nullius, treated indigenous peoples as inferior savages or even as non-existent. The same logic was applied to millions of enslaved African people. The Western hegemonic establishment, including corporations, universities, the mainstream media, etc., is actively enabling Israel's genocide, including epistelicide, in the terra nullius of Palestine. In parallel, it tries to silence us, to deprive us of our agency, of our ability to articulate genocide, to resist genocide, to stop genocide. Suppression of freedom of expression would never be satisfied with erasing only those voices advocating for Palestinian liberation, though. This is only a test ground, a laboratory of sorts for developing mechanisms of heightened repression that can be eventually wielded to further suppress struggles for racial, indigenous, economic, social, and climate justice. Unless stopped, Israel, with the deep complicity of the West, will indeed become the model for the global security state. And the already flawed liberal democracy will disintegrate into what the Congolese-American sociologist Pierre van den Berg calls Hellenvolk democracy. Democracy only for the masters, as Israel has always been, according to Israeli historian Ilan Pappé. Colonial powers that share with Israel what Naomi Klein calls a supremacist vision of safety and security for the few may then emulate Israel's might makes right paradigm to again exterminate or crush weaker nations and racialized communities that, in seeking justice, dare to defy systems of domination and subjugation. As early as October 2023, days into Israel's genocidal attack in Gaza, Colombian President Gustavo Petro warned of a, quote, unprecedented rise of fascism, and therefore to the death of democracy and freedom. Gaza, he said, is just the first experiment in considering us all disposable, end of quote. Giving us a taste of what such a dystopian future may look like, earlier this year, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said, quote, if you're not at the table in the international system, you're going to be on the menu, end of quote. Not only Israel is on trial at the International Court of Justice, the entire Western-dominated international legal system is also on trial. As international law scholar Mohsen Al-Attar puts it, quote, South Africa v. Israel will achieve what no anti-colonial movement ever could, a reckoning between international law and settler colonialism, starting with Euro-America's darling in the Levant, end of quote. To defend its darling in the Levant, the US-led Western establishment is aggressively promoting its hegemonic, Hellenvolk democracy and folk version of international law, trying to justify Israel's genocide by claiming that Israel's war on Gaza is in retaliation to an unprovoked attack by Palestinian groups. To refute this resilient myth, I should share 5 ethical and legal arguments. First, in any situation of oppression, where you start the timeline of violence reveals a lot about your moral compass. As the Brazilian philosopher Paulo Freire writes, quote, with the establishment of a relationship of oppression, violence has already begun. Never in history has violence been initiated by the oppressed. Violence is initiated by those who oppress, who exploit, who fail to recognize others as persons, not by those who are oppressed, exploited, and unrecognized. End of quote. The reaction of the oppressed, whether one considers any aspect of it morally or legally justifiable or not, is always just that, a reaction to the initial violence of the oppressor. Understanding the context and causes of resistance does not entail accepting its specific tactics. Second, well before October 7th, Israel's far-right government, its most racist, fundamentalist, sexist, and homophobic ever, had been ruthlessly escalating its ethnic cleansing, siege, pogroms, killings, incarceration, and daily humiliation of millions of Palestinians everywhere, thinking that its unmasked brutality could force Palestinians to surrender and accept oppression as fate. Israel's genocide, as South Africa has affirmed before the ICJ, must be understood within the broader context of its apartheid system. Third, 20 years ago already, in its ruling against Israel's illegal wall in occupied Palestinian territory, the ICJ affirmed that under the UN Charter, Israel, as an occupying power, has no right to self-defense against Palestinians under its military occupation. It's a basic tenet of international law. Moreover, the Genocide Convention does not allow for any justification to perpetrate genocidal acts. International law actually recognizes the right of all peoples resisting foreign occupation and colonization to resort to armed struggle within the realm of international law. However, the use of force against civilians is strictly prohibited, and the BDS movement, of course, upholds this principle. Fourth, regardless, condemning any illegal or immoral acts of violence that the oppressed may commit in resisting oppression in an inherently asymmetric relationship of power is acceptable, this criticism is acceptable, only if the condemning party has earned the moral standing to do so by being already on record condemning the prevailing system of oppression, the initial violence. Fifth and last, since oppression is the root cause of violence, those of us who sincerely care about ending all violence must end all oppression. As the struggle that ended apartheid in South Africa has shown, ending state, corporate, and institutional complicity in Israel's system of oppression, especially through the nonviolent tactics of BDS, is the most effective form of solidarity. Palestinians are not begging the world for charity. We're calling for meaningful solidarity. But before both, we are demanding an end to complicity. Everyone has a profound ethical obligation to do no harm and to repair harm done by them or in their name. So what is BDS? Launched in 2005, the nonviolent BDS movement is led by the largest coalition in Palestinian society. It's inspired by the South African anti-apartheid struggle and the US civil rights movement, and it's rooted in a century of Palestinian popular resistance. It aims at ending Israel's regime of occupation, apartheid, and upholding the right of our refugees to return and receive reparations. Anchored in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the BDS movement categorically opposes all forms of racism, including Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, and anti-Palestinian racism, obviously. BDS targets complicity, not identity. A 2022 poll shows that 16% of all Jewish Americans support BDS, with the percentage rising sharply for those under 40. They understand that there is nothing Jewish about Israel's siege, ethnic cleansing, massacres, land theft, occupation, apartheid, or genocide. And therefore, there's nothing anti-Jewish in supporting BDS to end these crimes and systems of injustice. Over the last 19 years, the BDS movement has built a massive network worldwide supported by trade unions, farmers' coalitions, as well as racial, social, gender, and climate justice movements, together representing tens of millions. BDS has played a significant role in the divestment of giant sovereign funds in Norway, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, New Zealand, and elsewhere from complicit companies and banks. It has made large multinationals such as Veolia, Orange, G4S, CRH, and Pillsbury, among others, end complicity in Israel's crimes. Mainstream churches in South Africa and the US have endorsed BDS or divested from complicit companies. The academic, cultural, and sports boycotts of Israel have grown tremendously. Norway's pension fund, the world's largest sovereign fund, has divested its entire $500 million worth of Israel bonds, as have the US-based United Methodist Church and Presbyterian Church USA. Intel, has frozen its planned 25 billion with a B investment in Israel, and Israeli high-tech is nosedive. Two major Japanese firms, Nippon Aircraft Supply and Itochu Corporation, have ended relations with Israel's largest private arms manufacturer, Elbit Systems. McDonald's has recently admitted the significant impact of BDS. City councils, especially in Europe and Latin America, have taken decisive measures against Israeli apartheid, and companies supporting it. Dock workers' unions in Belgium, Catalonia, California, Italy, Greece, Turkey, and elsewhere have taken actions against Israeli ships or arms shipments to Israel. In light of Israel's ongoing genocide and the repeated ICJ rulings and UN resolutions, what are the BDS priorities? First, peacefully disrupting business as usual with Israel in universities, trade unions, city councils, media outlets, and so on. Second, enacting academic, cultural, and sports boycotts of Israel and its complicit institutions. Third, divesting investment and pension funds of companies that are complicit in Israel's crimes, and excluding those companies from tenders and contracts. Fourth, declaring community centers, businesses, neighborhoods, cultural centers, etc. as apartheid-free zones. Fifth, organizing strategic intersectional campaigns to pressure investment and pension funds and institutions like city councils, trade unions, universities to adopt what we call ethical procurement policies and ethical investment policies that exclude companies implicated in great human rights violations anywhere in the world. These guidelines can then be applied to preclude companies involved specifically in Israel's genocide, apartheid, military occupation, and settlements. Sixth and last, supporting campaigns that pressure governments to adopt meaningful sanctions, especially a comprehensive military embargo. To conclude, if you hate violence, end oppression. If you hate oppression, end complicity. If you love freedom, justice, dignity, and equality for all, irrespective of identity as we do, mobilize pressure to end all complicity in Israel's 76-year-old regime of oppression and to dismantle along with it the resilient structures and imaginaries of coloniality in the West, so that no oppressed community is ever put on the menu of any oppressor. In this time of carnage, this is the most profound ethical obligation. Thank you.
J'aurais vraiment souhaité de pouvoir le remercier en personne, mais malheureusement, ça n'a pas été possible. Mais on dira ce que René Lévesque a déjà dit auparavant. Si j'ai bien compris, ce n'est qu'à la prochaine. Alors, c'est à la prochaine fois. Alors, nous allons continuer. Je vais vous présenter la prochaine personne qui va prendre la parole. C'est une personne, quand je dis j'ai le privilège vraiment d'être ici ce soir parmi ces merveilleux